ba 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 boo ba ba. Who's the man who will speak the truth? Boo ba 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 boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Who's the man who will bring light into your life? Boo ba 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 boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Who's the man who digs through human excrement to present you the gems? Boo ba 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 boo ba boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Who's the man who kinda sometimes knows what he's talking about? Boo ba 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 da boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Who's the man who has a scatterbrained, low IQ, and weak memory recall? Boo ba 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 da boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Who's the man who plays games and complains that he sucks at them? Boo ba 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 da boo ba ba. Lone Candle's that man. Hello. Welcome to Lone Candle Live. This is another beautiful episode of Reply Guyin' with Lone Candle, where we go over very important, world-changing discussions I have with random people on social media. This is where hopefully we learn from the topic. I learn from you, my loyal, intelligent audience. And you mostly learned not to be like me. Don't waste your time talking to randos in the comment sections. Anywho, today, let's see if I can find my mouse. Our topic is Russia and NATO, where I appear to be talking to actual Russians, either that or Russian sympathizers, about some issues. So, it's a YouTube video, so it's more difficult for you to see what I'm responding to, but that's okay, because they're mostly just responding, actually they're 100% just responding directly to what I said, rather than critiquing my critique, in which they should have to understand why I made this comment. So anywho, this actually wasn't a critique. It was more just, I felt like adding some context that I felt like was important. So I typed it in. I can't help myself. Let's see. This is what Lone Candle said here. Russia is sacrificing its future by wasting money and lives that could have been invested into more productive activities. That doesn't mean its economy is close to collapsing, though. And so this video was all about whether Russia's economy is going to completely collapse because of the invasion, which that's something to discuss. Legit, something to discuss. This wasn't really a critique, but I think we also need to make sure we're not forgetting, well, that's not the only economic thing to think about. We can also think about how much money they're wasting on the war, both the damage from sanctions, but also having to ramp up all the resources to fight the war, and getting a lot of people killed who could have been doing productive things. I mean, some of them were prisoners, but those other ones could have been doing productive things. And so, wow, that's extremely damaging to Russia, its economy, its people, and it's going to have really long-term effects that are really bad for the world. Anywho, so I just want to make sure that, let's not forget that when discussing whether it's going to collapse or not. Because obviously this is a very damaging war, but compared to the size of Russia's economy and compared to, like World War I or World War II, Russia's using a relatively small amount of its resources to fight the war compared to like an all-out war. But nevertheless, it's still very damaging. So anywho, of course, this guy's my favorite because he says, I wish yours was the top comment. I appreciate that, Stephen DJ 27. I assume he was born in 1927. I think that's what the 27 indicates. I don't really know, though. All right. I had a lengthy back and forth with Quark Lab. I assume he works on quarks. I think those are really small things or something. That it's a lab where he it's like psychology and he studies quirky people. Anyways, let's get to it. The EU allocates tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine that could have been invested in more productive activities. So it doesn't seem to be disagreeing. He's just pointing out that, the EU is spending money too. I don't know totally what he meant, what his goal was there, but yes, this is true. They are. It pales in comparison to what Russia is sacrificing, but it's still a lot of money. So let's see. I don't even remember what I said. This was 3 days ago, and the whole point of these is, other than my research pieces, which I hope you check out when I come out with them like twice a year. I don't want to spend too much run-up time on these. Anyways, my response. True. The war is costly for all sides. It is most costly for Ukraine, then Russia, then the rest of Europe and the US. Of course, it was Russia that decided to unjustly invade its neighbor, causing the war. That even if ending in victory won't be worth the cost unless someone really cares about the Russian Empire and rule /heavy influence over Ukraine. While for the EU, they don't know if Russia will decide to expand their empire further into more European countries. So it makes sense for them to invest in deterring Russia going forward while also keeping them further away for some countries. Because some countries already border Russia. Would border them anyways. They are also defending the principles of not invading other countries in wars of aggression, which can benefit Europe and the world. And so basically, I took his comment and essentially saying, oh, well, you're saying Russia's wasting money. Well, the EU's wasting money. To which, one is Russia is using a hell of a lot more resources. So I don't, it's a pretty silly comparison to some extent. But also, remember, the only reason anyone's spending money is because Russia chose to invade its neighbor. It was 100% their choice to invade its neighbor. A really evil thing to do and a really costly thing to do, although obviously they didn't expect it to be this costly. They thought they'd essentially conquer Ukraine and either regime change or take it all into Russia. We don't know for sure what they would have done. Although, if they do the regime change, it's a semi-Russian territory at that point anyways. They thought it would be a lot less costly. But either way, they made that decision. It was completely unnecessary, and let's be frank, it was evil. While Europe, they see someone invading their neighbor in between them and Russia, and they're like, oh, crap. We do not want Russia to think it can now invade us. So let's help Ukraine. Also, the principle that you don't invade another country. The more countries that are able to just invade their neighbors and get away with it, the more likely future countries will do it. The whole world is watching this. And if they see that a country relatively aligned with the U.S., which is what Ukraine is, it is just conquered and the U.S. does very little, the U.S. and Europe, they're going to think, well, if I invade my neighbor, there's a good chance they're going to back down in this case too. And so it matters for the whole world and for reinforcing these principles that, no, this isn't a time where you just invade your neighbor. Okay. So Cork said, if you are trying to play games with a nuclear country, then sooner or later, it may end up in the total end of humanity. This is true. This is very true. So I think if I'm trying to steelman here, and if I even understand where he's coming from, because sometimes I don't even know where people are truly coming from, but I'm trying to understand, if we're talking about the cost comparison, he's saying, oh, but you must remember Europe's intervention is risky. Yes, the cost is very small, but they risk a massive cost by playing, quote, games. I don't think they're playing games, but by getting involved. Now, of course, this is something that people claim a lot, and Russia, of course, one of its strategy is, hey, we're going to use nukes if you force us. But people are forgetting that there is a nuclear war risk on both sides. As in, if Russia invades Ukraine and done so very successfully, and they're like, hey, we have added to our empire, we have added to our influence, and oh my God, we basically got away with it with relatively low cost. Well, we like having an empire. A lot of these other countries next to us used to be a part of us before, either through the older Russian Empire or through the Soviet Union, which was a form of the Russian Empire. And, well, they may decide to invade further. They may decide, well, yes, I know these other countries are part of NATO, but, I mean, they didn't really do anything for Ukraine. Is Germany really going to risk nuclear war with me because I invade Poland? I mean, hell, we invaded Poland together not that long ago. Germany's not going to do anything. Germany's not going to do a damn thing. So I'm going to invade them too and expand the glory of the Russian Empire. Now, do I think that's the most likely outcome? No, but it becomes a lot more likely if you give Russian leaders the belief that they can get away with such things. And so there's a low risk of nuclear war either way because it's so costly for both sides. But in history, and, the Hitler and Putin, those stories are kind of similar in invading. In history, appeasement often creates more war because when you appease an aggressor, they think you're weak, they think you won't do anything, as well as wow, success. I can have more success. And so I actually think the risk of nuclear war is higher if you appease Russia than the other way around. And again, that's what happened with Hitler Germany. They appeased him, and he actually invaded more and created a much larger war. Another thing, and you'd want to do it diplomatically and state it in a way to make sure don't just want to nuke people. But what's up with this? I don't know. Anyways, but, when you're saying you don't want to don't want to play games with a nuclear country, but when Russia is threatening Ukraine and essentially threatening the EU, which this conversation right here is about the EU, although, I'm mentioning Europe too. They're obviously connected because they're allies. That Russia is also playing games with nuclear countries. Sometimes whenever Putin is threatening nukes, I just want to see our president say, hey, we got nukes too, right? In fact, we're the only ones to have ever used them. And we'll destroy this whole world for freedom and God if we have to. Sometimes I wish they would say that. And by the way, France has nukes, and so does the UK. So, I mean, this goes both ways, okay? I mean, you got to be careful with nuclear river saddling because you don't want to get in a point where you're threatening each other so much and you feel like you can't back ground, and then we're just like, well, maybe we'll just nuke one city each so that everyone knows we're serious, which of course is devastating for both countries. All right. So my response is probably similar to what I just said. There's a risk that the EU and US helping Ukraine will end a nuclear war. There's also a risk that allowing Russia to take Ukraine emboldens Russia and encourages it to suspect the West as weak and won't stop it from taking more territory from different countries, which then risks the West really needing to show it's serious and having a direct war between nuclear-armed countries, which risks nuclear war. Appeasement can increase the risk of greater war later. That's what it did for the case of Hitler. Either way, there is a nuclear war risk. All right. Russia's population is 3 times smaller than Europe's. If you can count, you'll understand why Russia will never invade Europe. There are a million other reasons, but I think this is enough. So I think he's saying it would be foolish for it even to try to invade Europe. So why would, it be a threat? So first of all, what Russia would do if it did invade at this point would be very highly unlikely to say, I declare war on all countries of the EU. In fact, I declare war on all NATO. And I intend on invading all the way to the western coast of Europe, including the United Kingdom. I doubt it. That's what it would do. It's most likely going to say, look, this country has done something bad. Here are the reasons, probably mostly made up. This country inherently belongs to the Russian Empire. They really shouldn't exist. Look at these historical reasons where they don't really count as a country. We are going to invade this country. Or these countries run by Nazis. Look at them. These countries are Nazis. This country doesn't really have the historical right to exist, and frankly, they're bad people. And so they're going to invade that country, or maybe even just a piece of that country, and try to bring it into Russia and hope that, well, NATO and Europe doesn't do anything. And so, yeah, Russia doesn't need to try to invade all of Europe. They can invade much smaller countries whose populations are actually much smaller than 3 times the size of Europe's. But, you know, the other way. Russia's population could be much larger, much more than 3 times larger than some of its neighbors. Let's see. Oh, this is actually a different guy, but that's fine. When you get multiple people commenting, there's no guarantee I actually saw both of these, but I'll read Quark's actual response. There's no point in Russia attacking the West. It is economically and politically unprofitable. Which, of course, the obvious response is, well, that's the case for Ukraine, too. So I don't know what he's doing. If it's not economically, politically unprofitable to take Estonia or Lithuania or and the other one, Latvia, no offense, Latvia, I almost forgot you. I forget most countries on Earth. I couldn't name all of them. So frankly, I'm pretty glad I thought of all 3 of them. Yeah. Actually, those countries are probably wealthier than Ukraine, you know, land for land, territory for territory, person for person. And so if they were able to conquer them and consolidate them, you know, fairly easily, it would be more profitable than Ukraine. But anyways, they attacked Ukraine, even though that one shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have thought it was economically and politically profitable, but it was. And of course, politically, really economically, it's definitely not. But politically, I don't know. You know, if Putin can show his people it was a win, a lot of people in Russian are nationalistic. It may actually help him politically, at least domestically. But anyways, all right, let's see. Looks like I did respond to both. Great. I would agree that attacking the West wouldn't make sense. But just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean it wouldn't make sense to Putin or another leader who passionately believes in Russian empire. Attacking Ukraine is also for sure not economically profitable, and the jury is still out on politics. But if a victory in Ukraine is politically profitable, so will a victory in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Sweden, Poland, etc. The West, I have trouble saying words that end in S. The West risks a Russian leader thinking such a victory is possible by giving them victory in Ukraine. Russia is invading Europe right now. Ukraine is a European country. Russia wouldn't declare war in their intention to invade all of Europe. They would go one country at a time. If the US and Europe abandon Ukraine, it is plausible for a Russian leader to think the rest of Europe and the US won't risk nuclear war over a NATO country that Russia one-on-one could defeat. Appeasement and Russian victory very well could lead Russia to thinking it can take another country or territory from it, because they may think the rest of Europe won't fight for that territory or country either. This is dumb because in the realm of loss and closer to their own borders and testing NATO, Europe and the US are more likely to fight. But a Russian leader could make that mistake. Okay, Quark Lab says attacking Western countries does not make sense for Russia, and attacking Ukraine makes sense for Russia, given the pressure from NATO and the confrontation in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. You may not agree with this, but Russia has personal tasks in Ukraine. In the West, Russia has no tasks. It makes no sense. I don't know what he means by tasks. Maybe he's not English first language, that just has a mean. I don't know how every word, even with English being my only language, I don't even know all the different ways to use different words. But I don't really know what he means by tasks here. Anywho, what pressure from NATO? NATO is not a threat to Russia and is unlikely to be Putin's motivation for the attack. NATO is a defensive alliance. Putin attacked Ukraine after Ukraine appeared to be getting closer to Europe economically. Putin believes Ukraine should be either a part of Russia or within Russia's realm of influence, and was afraid Ukraine moving closer to Europe economically would forever move Ukraine culturally closer to Europe. Putin's attack wasn't about defense or NATO. It was about empire, control over Ukraine, and losing Ukraine to Europe economically and culturally. Russia may have less of a little brother view of other countries, but Russians have invaded and controlled other European countries before. And some Russians would love to add those countries to Russia's empire again if given the chance. There's a reason Sweden and Finland suddenly wanted to join NATO after Russia invaded Ukraine. They feared that Russia would stop at Ukraine and would come for them next. Would not stop at Ukraine and come for them next. Russia threatens Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia regularly. There's a real threat that if a future Russia thought it could get away with stealing territory from another country, it would. Russia has already set up separatist puppet regimes in parts of Moldova and Georgia. It even invaded Georgia to keep their puppet regime in control of their territory. If given a chance, Russia would steal territory by a variety of aggressive means. Europe can't trust that Russia will stop at Ukraine. Yeah. So I don't know what he meant by tasks, but it's hard to respond to that. But look, NATO is very on the surface a defensive alliance, but not just on the surface. Like, all of its military positioning is as defense. It does not keep a lot of soldiers and equipment even near the Russian border. It is not even set up to invade Russia, and it would make no sense to invade Russia because Russia has nuclear weapons. There's really no reasonable indication that, oh, well, if Ukraine at some point in the future joined NATO, Russia would be invaded through Ukraine. It really makes no sense. And it's not even clear Ukraine would ever join NATO, because to join NATO, every single NATO country has to agree. And, well, before the war, there were major countries not agreeing to that. And when you look back at Putin's history, he has at times said he'd be fine if Ukraine joined NATO. He said that. And whenever he does attack NATO, the correlations aren't with something dealing with the military threat. The correlations are always with something about the European Union and Ukraine getting closer to the West economically. And even this very war, Russia invaded in this war that we're talking about now, not because there was some new talk about Ukraine joining NATO. No, it was because the Ukrainians overthrew a leader and were putting in someone who would move them closer to the EU, who would sign an economic pact with the EU. So this is about culture and economics, because if Ukraine was successfully integrated into the West, became more democratic, and became more economically successful by being connected to the West, they would be even more estranged from Russia and even see themselves as less Russian and brother of Russians than they do now. And Putin would hate that because he wants them to be a part of him. He believes in it. You know, if you look at his language and what he talks about and his motivations, they clearly are not, oh, I'm afraid of being debated. It's, I'm mad about the Russian Empire falling. I believe it is a Russian right to have either own or have great influence over some of our neighbors, and that it would be a tragedy if Ukraine moved west. And Ukraine, Putin, when he talks, it's very clear that's his motivation. So this stuff about NATO, it doesn't add up when you actually look at it all. It's not about NATO. It's about the EU. It's about wanting to control Ukraine. All right. Quick lab. If you were trying to... Wait. I feel like I already read that. If you were trying to plan a nuclear country, then sooner or later, it may mean the total end of humanity. Did he basically make that point twice? Trying to play games, then sooner or later, be total end of humanity. It looks like it was copy and pasted. You know, as far as I know, this is literally a Russian troll or even a Russian propaganda guy. I don't know. But either way, you know, these are serious arguments people will make. I mean, they might be bad arguments, so it's still worth taking them on. And can help you want to understand the issue better. And because you never know, someone might jump in and point out a crucial mistake I made, and then I'll get smarter and better understand the world, and that'll give me a little positive feeling of, yes, I better understand something. Great. Okay. Now I'll sit around and wait for cancer to get me. Football Cheetos. Yum, 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 yum. Okay. There's a risk that the EU and US helping Ukraine will end a nuclear war. There's also a risk that allowing Russia to take Iran and both Russia encourages it to suspect the West is weak and won't stop it from taking territory from different countries. This feels like this is a copy-paste what I wrote before too, which I didn't copy-paste. So I'm really confused here, which then risks the West really needing to show it's serious. Okay, we've had this whole conversation. I literally think this somehow got double posted for both of us. So let's move on. Oh no, I just like screwed up in my scrolling. Never mind. This is the last thing I read. Yeah, he said that. I read this already. Oh, I gotta like my own post because that's funny. So anywho, great. All right, almost done here because although this guy actually posted a few days before the other guy. Well, I have a massive response. He fortunately didn't respond, so we could both move on with our lives. All right, so should we have waited? So this was a comment on my original post. Should we have waited until NATO surrounded Russia, equipped it with missile systems, and began dictating its will under threat? Then Russia would have a future? And don't say it started after aggression. China hasn't attacked anyone, yet AUKUS exists and is increasing its presence in the region. Maybe Iran attacked the U.S., leading to it having been bombed. Maybe Venezuela poses a threat to the U.S. No, there is no one threat. No one threat to the entire independent world. There is only one threat to the entire independent world, U.S. hegemony. Better to die fighting than to be an American slave. So then it's again a claim that, oh, well, maybe Ukraine will join NATO, which again, Ukraine wasn't about to join NATO. It's not clear it would ever join NATO. So that's a big jump. And if it did join NATO, it would be no threat to Russia and at all. And if tensions rose up, we could surround them with missiles anyways. But yeah, I basically already discussed that. But it would never make sense for NATO to try to invade Russia or even to so threaten them with missiles, because obviously that threat only makes sense if you believe they might really try to attack Russia directly as you know, as an act of aggression. Because if you don't believe they'll ever do that, then you couldn't dictate anything. And it's not realistic that they would ever do that, both because they don't seem to desire to, but also because they don't really have the armies set up to invade Russia. And Russia has nuclear weapons. And there is no missile defense that can really block all of Russia's nuclear weapons from hitting major areas. I mean, even in Israel, which is defending a really small territory, you know, all of Europe, all the U.S., that's a really big territory. Missile defense can't defend all that, not very well. But even Israel, in that war with Iran, actually, it was amazing how many missiles were shot down, but a lot got through. And if those were nuclear weapons, Israel wouldn't exist right now because their shield didn't stop all the missiles. All right, let's read my long response, and then we'll probably call it a day. Okay. Russia was not under threat of being surrounded by NATO. Ukraine had little chance of joining NATO because it requires unanimous support and major European countries opposed it. Ukraine and NATO would not have been a threat to Russia because NATO is a defensive alliance and Russia has nuclear weapons. Ukraine is west of Russia, not north, south, and east. Russia wasn't being surrounded. Yeah, don't you say, oh, we're going to be surrounded. Well, right now, NATO is west, and they would still be west if Ukraine was added. So, you know, maybe I didn't mean that literally, but okay. Ukraine in NATO wouldn't give NATO any more power to dictate its will over Russia. That's a scare tactic. NATO doesn't need missile defense system in Ukraine to defend NATO. Missile defenses can't stop the number of nuclear missiles Russia can send NATO's way. Russia could have a beautiful future as a peaceful country. NATO, the rest of Europe, and the US have no desire to attack Russia. If it were up to them, Russia would become a peaceful trading country and live in peace. Giving up being obsessed with Greater Russia and unbased fears of NATO dictates could have allowed Russia to flourish with its neighbors. Instead, it has gotten thousands of its young men killed and is using much of its resources to finance its invasion of Ukraine. There was no realistic scenario where Russians would become American slaves. That's a fear-mongering fantasy. The truth is, Russians aren't dying to defend against NATO dictates or to defend against slavery. Russians are dying because their leader decided to invade its neighbor, to expand Russian control over Ukraine, who Putin thinks isn't a real country and by right should always be wedded to Mother Russia. It's an invasion for imperial power, influence, and control over a neighbor who wants to remain independent. Russians are dying for an evil cause, and their economy is being sacrificed for greed, unbased fear, and the desire to control Ukraine, who are, after all, just little Russians. The whole NATO scare tactic is a misdirection. Putin doesn't fear NATO. He fears the European Union. NATO would never attack Russia in a war of aggression, but the European Union can change the culture and allegiances of neighboring countries like Ukraine and bring them into a Russian sphere of influence. As this brings prosperity, it could even make Russians look at the success of its former subordinates and wonder why they are obeying a dictator rather than joining the West in freedom and prosperity. Russia started its invasion of Ukraine not because Ukraine was about to join NATO, but because the Ukrainians kicked out a pro-Russian leader and put in a government who wanted to get closer economic ties to the European Union. And yeah, so not only does Putin and some other Russian nationalists fear losing Ukraine, who they feel should be under the influence of Russia, and it would be horrible if they move closer to the West. It's actually a threat to the regime. It's a threat to Putin's regime, not to Russia, but to Putin's regime, because certainly there are closer cultural connections between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia and the rest of the rest. Not just cultural connections, but actually, family and friend connections is probably trade too. And if you get in a situation where Ukraine is very successful with capitalism, with democracy, and with, frankly, becoming more Western European, well, Russians will see that. And they will definitely have to question, why are we still listening to the dictates of a leader, of a dictator? And, there could be more pressure for democracy or different regime. So that's one other reason that, again, is not defense of Russia. Let's see. Okay, so he mentioned a bunch of things in his post. I don't think I responded to all of them, but of course it only took him a sentence to mention them. If I'm going to actually respond, it requires more words. So, yeah, that hurt my arm. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, this looks kind of messed up. Anyway, China has used military force to take territory in the South China Sea. China attacked India in the 60s. China openly wants to control its neighbors and to be the #1 worldwide influencer. China is specifically planning to invade Taiwan, who has democratically governed itself for decades and who don't want to be under the rule of the Communist Party in China. China is slowly making Russia its little bitch, as Russia is more and more dependent on China, which it wouldn't be if it didn't choose to invade its neighbor. Something like AUKUS would exist without the U.S. Something like AUKUS, which is cooperation, not a full-on alliance, but cooperation between Japan, Australia, India, and the United States. Probably the UK too. That's probably what that UK stands for. I don't remember everyone who's in it, but you can look that up. Something like AUKUS would exist without the U.S. China is actively trying to control its region and pressures its neighbors to submit India, Japan, and Australia and other regional countries have the incentive to band together to balance China with or without the US. Why do you think India strives so hard to be soft on Russia? Because India sees Russia as a partner to balance China if needed. Although Russia is making itself in a worse position to do that by invading Ukraine. I mean, Russia is weakening itself and becoming more dependent on China, so now it's less likely to be able to or willing to help India if India needed help balancing against China. So anyways, yeah, he acted like China was a peaceful country, but no, China's actually pretty aggressive. And he talked like AUKUS is aggression. No, AUKUS was, once again, that's a bunch of countries going, holy crap, China's really strong and they're talking aggressively, they're acting aggressively. We should probably prepare just in case. And that's what's going on there. And that would exist without the U.S. He also mentioned Iran. Iran, like the U.S. attack on Iran, was just, in any way equivalent to the invasion of Ukraine. Iran has directly been supporting terrorist groups for decades. Iran supports these groups despite that they explicitly say they want to destroy Israel and have repeatedly attacked Israel. Iran itself says Israel should be crushed and ended. A country that says it wants to destroy another country and that has supported terrorist groups for decades is a clear threat with a nuclear weapon. A U.S. ally asked for help, so the U.S. helped. All right, last paragraph. Russia has been an aggressor to its neighbors for centuries. The nearby countries rightfully fear Russia. It makes sense for their independence to want to join NATO. They knew Russia may have been down after the collapse of the Soviet Empire. But they knew Russia could resurge and renew its desire for domination. So they clamored to join NATO for protection. Surveys show that the further east you go in Europe, the more people see Russia as a threat to Europe. I don't even remember what he said anymore, but the reason a bunch of countries want to join NATO isn't from some sort of aggression from the U.S., expanded U.S. empire. No, it's because these countries legitimately and have good historical reasons to fear Russia, and it's kind of shown by the invasion of Ukraine that Russia was going to get over the Soviet Union collapse and may very well want to control them again in one way or another. And joining NATO is one way to protect against that. It's a defensive alliance against what had proven to be a clear aggressor to these exact countries. All right. So I don't know if any of that was clear or not, but it's a very interesting subject. I actually did write a long-form piece around these things near the beginning of the Ukraine war. You can find it on all my different sites. LoneCandle.com. You click on the videos. If you want to read, once you get to the video, you could copy and paste a link there, which will have the medium piece, and you can just read it if you prefer reading to listening. Well, I'm Lone Candle. This was another episode of Reply Guyan with Lone Candle. Why is this screen so bright? It hurts my eyes. I need to redo this and make it a dark mode screen. But thanks for joining me. All the millions of people around the world who join me for Lone Candle Live. End stream.